They won't admit it out loud, but you feel it. The tension, the sudden silence, the way the energy in the room shifts the second you walk in. They look away, they speak differently, they laugh less. And you are left wondering, what did I do? But it's not about what you did, it's about who you are. Or more precisely, what your presence awakens in them. You've been told you are too much, too intense, too quiet, too deep. That your energy is hard to explain, and harder to forget. But what if, like Carl Jung believed, your presence is not a problem, it's a revelation. You carry something most people don't recognize, not charisma, not charm, but clarity, a psychological force, a kind of stillness that strips away masks, that unsettles people, not because you're dangerous, but because you're real. You don't play roles, you don't seek approval, and you don't hide from your own shadow. That alone makes people flinch, because your presence reflects everything they are trying to avoid, their uncertainty, their shame, their need to perform. So they shrink, they gossip, they keep their distance, not because they see a threat, but because they feel one. Carl Jung spent his life studying this kind of energy, the quiet gravity of those who have integrated their unconscious, the mirror effect of someone who has faced themselves. This video will reveal the 13 signs your presence might be silently unsettling to others, not because you are broken, but because you are awake, and in a world built on illusion, nothing is more feared than someone who sees clearly. Most people think of an aura as something mystical, a glowing cloud of colors, something only psychics or spiritual healers talk about. But Carl Jung saw it differently. To Jung, your aura wasn't a layer of light. It was a psychological field, an invisible force shaped not by crystals or chakras, but by your unconscious mind. He believed that every human being radiates a silent influence, a kind of psychic gravity that reaches far beyond words, facial expressions, or even intentions. And this field is constantly being shaped by the parts of you that are hidden, repressed, denied. This means your aura is not created by who you pretend to be. It's created by who you actually are, especially the parts of yourself you've had the courage to face. When you confront your shadow, when you integrate your trauma, your flaws, your truth, something begins to change in you, energetically. You stop chasing validation. You stop leaking neediness. You stop conforming just to feel accepted. And in that quiet transformation, your presence begins to carry weight, not loud, not aggressive, but undeniable. You become someone people feel before they understand, someone who doesn't need to say much, because your silence says enough, someone who makes others feel exposed, not because you're trying to, but because your energy speaks to what they're trying to hide. Jung called this the unconscious transmission of the self, the way your presence can communicate far more than your personality. This is why people stare at you longer, why they struggle to explain why they feel nervous around you, why they feel judged even when you've said nothing. It's not that you're giving off bad vibes, it's that your aura is integrated, and most people have never encountered that kind of energy before. You didn't learn how to intimidate, you learned how to be honest. And honesty, Jung warned, is a rare frequency, because it only comes from someone who's done the inner work. Sign 1. People compete with you silently. You're not trying to outshine anyone. You're not showing off. You're not even in the game. But still, people try to win around you. Suddenly they're name-dropping, bragging, flexing their accomplishments, talking louder, trying harder. And you're just watching. You never asked for a competition, but your presence triggered one anyway. Carl Jung believed that when someone carries integrated energy, the kind that comes from inner alignment, it unsettles people whose identity is built on comparison. Because your self-assurance isn't performative, you're not trying to dominate, you're just clear. And clarity makes insecure people panic. They feel the need to prove something, not because you challenge them, but because your existence challenged the story they've built about themselves. To the ego, your calm is a threat. Your stillness feels like power. Your detachment looks like superiority. And so, the ego scrambles. It competes. It tries to reclaim ground that was never lost. This is why you might notice people subtly trying to one-up you, correct you, outtalk you, or suddenly act defensive when you simply express a thought. It's not about you. It's about the identity their ego is trying to protect. You're not triggering a rivalry. You're triggering a realization. That confidence without noise exists. And that kind of presence can't be faked. You don't need to play the game because you already stepped outside of it, and those still trapped in the illusion of winning can't help but treat your presence like a silent threat. Sign 2. Your presence kills small talk. Instantly. You're not trying to be rude. You nod, you smile, you say all the right words, but somehow the room still goes quiet. The moment someone tries small talk around you, it dies. The conversation thins, the energy shifts, and people sense it, even if they can't explain it. You're not being cold, you're just being real, and your energy doesn't know how to fake it. Carl Jung believed that people who've connected deeply with their unconscious develop what he called psychological attunement, a natural sensitivity to what's authentic and what's not. And that sensitivity lives in your aura. You don't need to say, "This feels fake." Your presence already does, without a word. Because surface-level conversation, the weather, the latest gossip, the scripted pleasantries, it doesn't match your frequency. Your presence demands depth. Not through force, but through contrast. People feel it. Their subconscious registers it. Your stillness calls out their noise. Your calm exposes the performance. And so, they shrink the conversation. They stumble. They get quiet. Or they walk away saying, something about them is intense. But it's not intensity. It's alignment. You've spent time in silence. You've sat with your shadow. You've asked yourself the questions most people avoid. So now, your presence carries weight, not the weight of arrogance, but the gravity of someone who doesn't waste words. And in a world addicted to distraction, that kind of energy kills scripts. It ends performances. It exposes the void between words. And that's where truth begins. Sign 3. You unmask the hidden agenda in others. You don't accuse anyone. You don't expose secrets. You don't even need to speak. But somehow, people feel seen in your presence. And not in a way they're comfortable with. The manipulator grows quiet. The charmer stumbles. The overly nice suddenly seems unsure. Why? Because your energy sees beneath. Carl Jung believed that when someone has integrated their shadow, they develop a psychological X-ray, a kind of inner vision that cuts through performance and pierces into motive. You're not judging. You're not even analyzing. You're just present. But that presence sends a signal. You can't lie here. And so, the mask starts to slip. The game becomes obvious. The script feels stale. People who rely on control, performance, or manipulation can feel this shift instantly. They don't know why, but something in them pulls back. They get defensive, awkward, even hostile. Not because you caught them, but because your presence reminded them they've been performing for so long. They don't know who they are without the act. And for someone clinging to illusion, the worst thing they can feel is visible. You didn't call them out. You didn't confront them. You just were. But being real in a room full of masks, that's confrontation enough. Your aura doesn't expose people through words. It exposes them through contrast. And when someone's entire identity is a performance, even your silence feels like a spotlight. Sign 4. People feel judged even when you say nothing. You did not criticize them. You did not correct them. You did not even flinch, but still, they felt it, that sting, that tension, that subtle rush of defensiveness. Why? Because your silence speaks louder than their masks. Your presence does not need to say a word. It already says everything. Carl Jung taught that when you have integrated your unconscious, when you have made peace with your own flaws, darkness, and truth, you radiate something unsettling to those who have not. It's not aggression, it's not judgment, it's just alignment. And to someone who is out of alignment, that feels like being exposed. Your stillness becomes a mirror. Your eye contact feels too raw. Your calmness, almost accusatory. Not because you're condemning them, but because they are suddenly aware of everything they've buried. People feel judged by you, not because you're looking down on them, but because you're not performing with them. And when someone's identity depends on external validation, your neutrality feels like rejection. Your silence feels like disapproval. Your peace feels like a threat. They will say you are cold, too quiet, unfriendly. But what they really mean is, you make me feel things I'm not ready to feel. You don't need to speak to challenge someone. Your very presence already creates a contrast between who they are and who they pretend to be. And that contrast does not lie. It lingers, long after the conversation ends. Sign 5, you trigger envy without even trying. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're not competing. You're not even speaking about yourself. But somehow, you still become a target. The side eyes, the passive-aggressive comments, the fake compliments laced with tension. You can feel it, the unspoken resentment from people who barely know you. Carl Jung believed that when someone is internally aligned, when they radiate peace without seeking permission, they unconsciously challenge everyone who is not. Your calm is intimidating to those who are anxious. Your confidence feels arrogant to those who secretly doubt themselves. Your authenticity offends those still living behind masks. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because your existence reflects what they're not. You don't have to say a word. Your energy already says, I have faced myself. And for someone running from their reflection, that truth hurts. You might notice how people twist your strengths into flaws. They call your peace detached, your clarity self-righteous, your solitude arrogance. But it's not about you. It's about what they feel in themselves. When you are around, you are a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. You trigger envy, not because you are perfect, but because you carry something rare, inner wholeness. And in a world of fragmentation, that wholeness is not just seen, it's felt. And what's felt cannot be ignored. Sign 6. People act differently. When you're around, they were laughing loudly before you arrived, telling stories, owning the room. Then you walked in, and something shifted. The volume dropped, the tone changed, their posture stiffened. Even the air felt heavier. And you didn't even say a word. Carl Jung believed that when someone carries an integrated presence, a self that's been forged through shadow work and inner truth, their very existence disrupts the performance of others. You don't have to challenge anyone. Your presence already does, because you bring a different energy, one that's not chasing attention, one that doesn't beg for belonging, one that doesn't need to impress to feel valid. And that energy creates contrast, a contrast most people aren't prepared to feel. The loudest person in the room, suddenly quieter. The self-proclaimed leader starts fumbling their words. The group dynamic that felt so comfortable before now feels uncertain, unstable, exposed. Why? Because you don't operate within their script. You don't play the social game. You're not performing. And that makes their performance painfully obvious. They don't know why they feel different around you, but they do. And it's not about fear, it's about pressure, the silent pressure of being real. Your presence doesn't ask for truth, it creates it. And in a world built on social masks, that kind of presence doesn't just stand out, it reshapes the entire room. Sign 7. Fake authority feels threatened by you. You've seen it before. The shift in posture, the sudden defensiveness, the way the person in charge starts correcting you, even when you didn't challenge them. Or worse, they avoid you. They exclude you. They pretend not to notice you because your presence makes them feel less in control. Carl Jung believed that real power comes from within, from integration, not domination. And when someone with real power walks into the room, those who rely on status feel it immediately. You don't obey invisible hierarchies. You don't shrink yourself to make others feel important. And you don't give automatic respect to titles, roles, or egos. That alone is dangerous to them. You didn't break the rules. You simply don't need the rules to define you. And that makes people who live for validation feel exposed. Your quiet self-assurance threatens those who built their authority on image. Not because you challenge them, but because your energy doesn't bend to them. It's not rebellion, it's self-possession. And in environments built on compliance, that feels like resistance. You'll notice how some authority figures try to test you, subtly undermine you, out-talk you, or diminish your presence. But none of it works, because your power isn't performative, it's psychological. And psychological power doesn't flinch. You don't need to raise your voice, or prove your worth. You just need to exist fully. And those pretending to lead will feel it. Because your presence says, I don't fear your image, I see through it. Sign 8. You're seen as dangerous when you set boundaries. You were kind, you were present. You gave your time, your energy, your attention, until one day, you didn't. You said no, you pulled back, you protected your space, and suddenly you changed. Now you're cold, distant, arrogant. The narrative flips, not because you hurt anyone, but because you stopped letting them use you. Carl Jung believed that those who've integrated their shadow no longer seek to be liked by everyone, because they've already made peace with not belonging. When you set boundaries, you shift the power dynamic. You remind people, gently but firmly, that your energy is yours to give, not theirs to take. And for those who were only drawn to your softness, your silence now feels like betrayal. Your no feels like a threat, not because it's cruel, but because it's sovereign. You don't over-explain, you don't over-apologize. You simply stop allowing what no longer feels right. And that makes people uncomfortable, especially those who depended on your availability to avoid their own emptiness. They'll say you've changed, that you're closed off, that you think you're better than them. But the truth is, you just stopped playing the role they liked you in. You reclaimed your energy, and people don't like losing access to what they never appreciated. You're not dangerous, you're just no longer easy to manipulate. And in a world where control often hides behind connection, boundaries look like rebellion. But they're actually the beginning of self-respect. Sign 9, others project their darkness onto you. You were just being kind. You listened. You showed up. You gave space. But somehow, you became the villain. They said you were manipulative, cold, passive-aggressive, hard to read, even dangerous. And you're left wondering, how? When all you did was exist honestly. Carl Jung called this phenomenon projection. When a person can't face their own shadow, they unconsciously assign it to someone else. You didn't judge them. You didn't attack them. You simply reflected something back that they weren't ready to see. And instead of confronting their insecurity, they saw arrogance in your confidence. Instead of owning their guilt, they saw judgment in your silence. Instead of recognizing their neediness, they saw manipulation in your calm. Your presence became a canvas for the emotions they couldn't name, for the flaws they couldn't accept, for the darkness they couldn't hold. And so, they painted you with the colors of their own shadow. You were never cruel, you were never false, but you were clear, and that clarity can feel violent to someone who's been lying to themselves. You didn't hurt them, but your presence made them feel uncomfortably seen, and people would rather label you as toxic than admit that your energy awakened something painful in them. You're not carrying their darkness, but they'll try to make you, because it's easier to blame the mirror than to face the reflection. Sign 10, people confess, then disappear. They opened up to you, told you things they hadn't told anyone, shared their trauma, their regrets, their unspoken thoughts, and for a moment, it felt real, raw, human. You didn't ask for their secrets. You didn't pry. You just listened, with presence, with silence, with something deeper than most people know how to hold, and then they vanished. They stopped texting, stopped calling, became distant, cold, as if that moment of connection never happened. Carl Jung believed that some people carry the archetype of the healer, not because of what they do, but because of who they've become. You carry that energy, a field of emotional gravity that makes people feel safe, safe enough to be real, safe enough to be vulnerable, safe enough to touch a part of themselves they usually avoid. But that safety comes with a price, because once someone sees their own pain in the mirror you provide, they're faced with a choice: grow or retreat. And most people, they retreat. Not because you did anything wrong, but because they weren't ready. Your presence didn't break them. It revealed them. And revelation without readiness feels like exposure. You became the doorway to a version of themselves they weren't ready to meet. And so, they walked away. Not from you, but from themselves. You didn't lose the connection. You just made it too real. Sign 11. You're the mirror. They avoid. You don't confront people. You don't criticize. You're not trying to teach, fix, or correct anyone. You're just there, present, grounded, still. But somehow, people shift around you. They fidget. They talk too much. Or they say too little. And deep down, they avoid your eyes. Because looking at you, really looking, feels like looking into themselves. Carl Jung believed that the more you integrate your shadow, the more you become a mirror to those who haven't. Not by intention, but by contrast. Your presence doesn't reflect their image. It reflects their truth, the anger they suppress, the fear they deny, the dreams they abandoned, the masks they wear. You don't speak it, but they feel it. And what they feel, they fear. Because when someone is not ready to confront themselves, even kindness feels intrusive. Even silence feels invasive. Even your calm feels confrontational. You are the mirror they never asked for, but can't forget. And so, they avoid you. Not because you're dangerous, but because you're revealing. You don't show them who you are, you show them who they're not. And that kind of reflection is rare, uncomfortable, and unforgettable. You are not misunderstood because you're unclear. You're misunderstood because you're too clear. And for people hiding from themselves, clarity feels like exposure, and exposure feels like pain. Sign 12. You radiate unapologetic energy. You're not loud, you're not aggressive. You're not trying to dominate the space. But still, you feel like a lot to some people. Why? Because you don't shrink. You don't soften your truth to make others comfortable. You don't dilute your energy to fit in. You carry yourself with quiet conviction, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything, because it's already rooted in something deeper, self-respect. Carl Jung believed that when someone begins to embody their whole self, light, shadow, contradictions and all, they stop negotiating their existence. You've stopped apologizing for who you are. You've stopped editing your voice to avoid tension. You've stopped making yourself small so others can feel big. And that makes you dangerous. To those who've never known themselves without external approval, people say you're intense, too opinionated, too sensitive, too deep. But what they really mean is, you're not easy to control. Your energy doesn't ask for permission. It just is, fully, authentically, unapologetically. And in a world built on pleasing, performing, and pretending, that kind of presence feels like a disruption. You didn't come to play a role. You came to live in truth, and your aura reflects that. So yes, you may be too much. For those who've never met someone who won't bend to be liked, but the ones who are awake, they don't feel overwhelmed by your presence. They feel invited by it, to rise, to remember, to reclaim their own. Sign 13. You walk alone, but not lost. There's a distance around you, a quiet, a space no one seems to enter, at least not for long. You've felt it for years, at school, at work, even among friends and family. Not the loneliness of being unwanted, but the solitude of being unmatched. Carl Jung believed that those who walk the path of individuation, the journey toward their true, whole self, often do so alone, not because they're broken, but because they've outgrown the noise, the masks, the shallow connections that once felt like belonging. You see through too much now. You feel too deeply. You ask questions that make others uncomfortable, and you carry an energy that can't be contained by surface-level living. So you walk alone, but not in sadness, in sovereignty. Because solitude, for you, isn't a punishment. It's a sign that you no longer chase closeness just to escape yourself. A sign that your inner world has become enough. A sign that your path isn't crowded, because it was never meant to be. People will misread you, call you distant, call you guarded, but the truth is, you're just rare. And rare souls don't travel in packs. They walk the edges, the in-between, the quiet roads where depth is the only companion. You're not lost, you're not behind, you're not too late, you're just ahead of the timeline, already living the kind of truth most people never touch. And that kind of walk, it's meant to be quiet. So, maybe now, it makes sense. The silence when you entered the room, the subtle glances, the tension, the distance that always seemed to follow you. It was never really about your words, or your tone, or your choices. It was your presence, your stillness, your clarity, your refusal to perform. You did not mean to threaten anyone. You were not trying to provoke. You were just awake, in a world still half asleep. Carl Jung said that awakening begins the moment you confront yourself, not the version you show the world, but the raw, unfiltered truth beneath the mask. And you did that. You walked through your shadow. You faced your chaos. You reclaimed your soul. And when you returned, you glowed differently, not louder, not brighter, but realer. And real is rare. Real is confronting. Real makes people squirm because it reflects everything they are not ready to see. You were never too much. You were never the villain. You were simply a mirror to those still hiding from their own reflection. You did not carry darkness. You carried light. But light, when it enters a dark room, does not always get applause. Sometimes it gets attacked, misunderstood, pushed away, because it exposes what was meant to stay hidden. But don't dim, don't shrink, don't apologize for the truth you carry, because the very thing that makes you feel alone is the proof you are becoming whole. Not everyone will understand you. Not everyone is supposed to. Your path is not built for approval. It's built for awakening. So the next time they call you intense, intimidating, or too much, you smile and remember, you were not here to make them comfortable. You were here to remind them what truth feels like.